When we stepped on stage, Ruby and I, in 1946, it was as much an act of the affirmation of civil rights as anything we ever did. The play itself was about a young veteran coming back trying to get a job, and Robeson, Lena Horne, Canada Lee were all people on Broadway at that time, and they were involved. Broadway itself was involved in absorbing the new people who had come down from Harlem. Ourselves, we were in the first generation to be integrated onto the Broadway stage. Broadway was concerned about racism. Lynchings were going on in the South. Soldiers were being shot for returning from the army. So that when you're on Broadway, you were also involved in that struggle. Broadway was one of the first unions who had a clause that said, if you don't want to work in the National Theater in Washington, D.C., you don't have to, because it segregates the audience. And in the union, you had that spirit and that fight. So once we stepped into the theater, once we were accepted, it was from one thing to another. There was always a rally, there was always fundraising, and then election time, with Robeson not running but campaigning for Wallace. All of this was just a natural part of and we went to Washington to try to get an anti-lynch law, and then in 1954, the Supreme Court spoke out against segregation, and the South responded in '55 by killing Emmett Till, and we responded in December '55 by Rosa Parks not getting up off her seat, and little by little, the struggle escalated, and Ruby and Ossie and a whole heap of other people were just caught up as it went along, and whatever parts came for us to play, we tried to play them.
And this part of the civil rights movement was on television.
Oh, yes, it was. This is what our children saw. This is what we had to sit at the dinner table and explain to them. Those dogs biting those children.
The hoses.
Yeah. How can we explain that? And we explained it to them. But television, very skillfully used by Dr. Martin Luther King, became an integral part of the civil rights struggle. They knew exactly how to get the camera there and to wait until the button was, roll them, and then the civil rights struggle would take off and become eloquent and express itself.
Vividly.
Very, very vividly.
With the dogs and the hoses.
And that 1963 march on Washington, where Burt Lancaster flying in from Europe to be a part of it, an actor, Marlon Brando, and I forget other actors, and Sidney Poitier, and Harry Belafonte, and Lena Horne, and all of us being a part of that, surrounding Martin, surrounding Malcolm, being energized by what was happening, being transformed by what was happening.
What other organizations did you belong to in the civil rights movement?
Well, I belonged, we had a thing called the Committee for Fair Play to Cuba Committee, which got us into all kinds of trouble. And there was an organization formed to secure better treatment on Broadway, which I forget what it was. But certainly the NAACP, we were supporters of SNCC and supporters of Malcolm X, although we were never Muslims, and supporters of Martin Luther King, though we did not belong to the Southern Leadership Conference. We were sort of in a standby mode to whatever was happening. Our funds, our feet, our energy was all there for them to use if it was felt that we could be of help.
Now, in that civil rights movement, you had Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, even Medgar Evers.
Yeah.
And you had said at some point that these were three different civil rights leaders with three different methods in order to gain civil rights. Could you explain what you meant by that?
In the black community, there's always two different political possibilities presented to us. One was the integrationist possibility, that black folks would ultimately become members of American society with everybody else. And then there was those who said, no, America is white and is never going to accept black folks. So Malcolm sort of represented the separatist group, Martin sort of represented the integrationist group, and Medgar sort of represented an amalgamation of the two in general. This would take much longer to explain than the time we have, but these were about the three prongs. And Ruby and I tried to relate meaningfully to all of those prongs. They were not in opposition, although sometimes they fought among each other, but they always got together in the clutch, and we tried to be there when that happened.